Welcome to this session for the Hassall Family History Association on the 10th of July for 2021. And we're speaking today with Dr. Robert Wiles. Robert's a medical doctor. He's also my first cousin. He and I and our brothers and sisters share the same grandparents, Hector and Mabel Hassell. And so I've known Rob all my life. And I've known of his interests not only in his own various fields of interest, but also in family history and in genealogy. Rob, I'm going to ask him to explain his background at first as we get into this subject. But Rob has been one of the pioneers within this association of recording the details of our family members, and we wanted to have a chance to hear from him. So Rob, welcome today. We look forward to hearing from you. I hand it over to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I enjoyed our session a couple of months ago, and it's given me time to think about a few things. Graham has kindly given me a few topics. He said, you can speak when I run out of things to say. You mightn't get much in this morning because I can talk from now till next week. Yeah, I'm happy to take questions. So a bit about myself. I was born in Sydney. My grandparents were on the land at West Wyalong, and my mother married a doctor, a surgeon in Sydney, and so I grew up in Sydney. I was blessed with having two grandmothers who collected family history all their lives, and they had copious scrapbooks, and in fact both of them managed to, they had an interest in family history, and they would collect all the photos and scrapbooks that nobody else wanted. And people would say, oh, do you want this? And they'd say yes. And instead of going to the dump, they collected them. And so no one seemed to have the time or the interest to put much into it when I was growing up. And so they showed me all their scrapbooks, and I've benefited from a lot of that. I got into perhaps a bit about myself further. I didn't know what I wanted to do in life, but I found I was interested in biology, and I decided to study medicine at the University of Sydney. And the experience I had with my grandparents as we were growing up, they're GPs in West Wyalong, Eric and Anne Fisher, used to bring their 4 children out, and we would have picnics together on my grandparents' property. And I thought, well, this looks really fun. You can have your holidays and your work all in the same thing. And so I thought rural general practice seemed a very good idea, and I aimed to do that. And I went over to England to study anaesthetics and obstetrics and gynecology. And then I met a very nice girl, and we got married in the New Forest in England. And then we came back, and I brought Dawn back to Australia. We settled in Cooma, and we've been here for 30 years now. So that's a bit about my background. As Graham says, we're first cousins, and Uncle David's on the line. So but we're descended through the Samuel O'Toole line, and I might leave all the rest of that for the moment. I got into genealogy because of genetics, actually. It wasn't anything else. One day in biology in year 9 or something, we had to trace a genetic tray through our family. And one of the simplest ones is eye color, because it's very obvious and it's got simple inheritance characteristics. And because I had a lot of family history, I was able to trace 6 generations of eye color. And that got me intrigued, because to know what the color of people's eyes are, you've got to know who they are. And so that started me finding out who the people were, and that was the start of my genealogy. I was thinking, I've had time to think since Graham sent me this list a little while ago, and I was thinking one of the reasons I got particularly interested in genealogy was that and I was thinking of talking about this at the end, but it's relevant here. I think genealogy gives you a grounding into who you are. It shows you where you've come from, and it introduces you. I met an awful lot of people, not an awful lot, a wonderful lot of people who I never would have met except that I was hunting for information, and that was fascinating. Going to properties around the place, I put my foot in it many times, saying the wrong thing about marbled beef to a family in Goulburn who had beautiful marbled beef when I was studying the evils of cholesterol in medicine. So yes, you've got to be careful as you go along, but they were very forgiving, and that was very helpful for me, because as my parents' marriage was in trouble, I was wondering what's in life, where is meaning, and this is one of my passions now, is where we get meaning in life, and especially for the next generation. My wife and I do a lot of counselling. Dawn's a doctor as well, and she does a lot of counselling and mental health. We're having a tsunami of people who lack meaning in life, and I was thinking, reflecting on today, that I got some degree of meaning out of discovering where I'd come from and how I got here. And I think that can be very beneficial for people. And I think it would be helpful for a lot of the next generation, at least to start off with, that they know who they are and where they've come from and why they're here. And so I think, I don't think Graham will disagree with me that history is one of the most important subjects to study. And I've loved it all my life, even though I've only done it as an amateur. But it's lots of fun. So my early research, I started interviewing all the people that were available. And the most obvious thing is start with the oldest first, because, and I wish I'd had the technology then that I have now. Every time you go and talk to an older relative, or any relative, take something to record, because a lot of the people, great aunts and great uncles, they had encyclopedic memories going back, 80, 90 years, and most of it wasn't written down. And I was busy scribbling all sorts of names and information I had no idea of, and I lost a lot of it just because I couldn't record it fast enough, and I never got back to them in time before they passed on. And so I regret that I didn't collect more information when I started out, but I did meet a lot of interesting people, and I did glean some information. So I travelled around Australia to begin with, and then when I graduated from medicine and I earned some money, then I could afford to travel, and all my ancestry comes from either the British Isles or France, and so I wanted to go and extend the research in Britain and Ireland, and so I combined my medical studies with genealogy research, and that was fascinating. Got into some interesting places, driving around Northern Ireland in the fog, started being followed, which didn't look very good at one stage when I was trying to find the campground, but I found the campground and the car didn't stop me. But yes, it's you can get into fun situations sometimes. So I also decided that I would get some professional inverted commas help, and I joined the Society of Genealogists in Sydney, and they had some very experienced people who were able to direct me and make me more efficient in what I did. I bought some books, and that helped me start off on the right foot. And I'm sure you all know already, but you have to start with what is known and then move to what is unknown. Otherwise, you don't have anything to ground your information to verify its authenticity or its veracity. So I learned, it was very beneficial for me. I learned a lot about research, and even before I got into trying to look at medical research and things like that. But being able to assess a piece of information and to know how useful it is, or how much I can trust that piece of information is really important. And I have my impression is that it's not taught well in schools today, and a lot of people will take information, especially off the internet, and they will trust it, or they will use it, and they won't test it before they believe it, and that worries me. Um, so um, Yeah, that's sort of my early research. I traveled around England. I have 27 different ancestors on both sides of the family. On the Hassell line, on my mother's side, there's 10 ancestors arrived independently before 1800. So there's a lot of material there in Australia. But whereas my first person on my father's side didn't arrive till the 1830s as a convict. And so chasing 27 lines down in Britain, I never ran out of things to do. Um, the, um, the problem is that there isn't enough time in life to chase everything. So you sort of go for the low hanging fruit, basically. And I would jump from one place to the other to see what I could find in all the different lines. With the 1988 reunion, which I think Huon and David hatched. I believe it was you two who came up with the idea, but and I thought, oh, this looks like fun. And then there were a couple of other people got on board, and that was quite a wild time going between Melbourne with David Hassell down there and Sydney. We had lots of fun. It was very busy because we had little children at the time as well. But in doing that, I decided I wanted, and we were going to bring out a book, which I'm sure you've all seen, but it's this one, and it's trying to find the history in England, because there's lots of stories and it's very hard to be sure, how accurate all the stories were. And so I was interested in going to Coventry, and one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is accents, and unfortunately can't put an accent in a book. So I did do a few recordings of the accent of the Midlands, because accents really haven't changed a lot in places in Britain, and so you can be fairly sure that you'll know the accent of your ancestors if you go and visit the places they left. But we walked down Spon Street, and we did some research in Coventry, looked around. There wasn't nearly enough time, and then we tried tracing the origins of the Hassells, who seem to come from Cheshire. But so then there was a big leap because we're missing information. Unfortunately, a lot of our ancestors didn't leave information in nice recorded forms that I would have appreciated. And sometimes the Hassell family seem to have been dissenters, and so they um, uh, um, um, shunned the church, I suppose you could say, and intentionally didn't leave records before Roland's parents' family, with James Hassell. And so we've got a hole in the data, and I'm not sure we'll ever fill that in. There are clues in that Roland's older brother was Ralph, and it was traditional at that time to name the eldest child in favour of their grandparent. So there's a good chance that James's father was Ralph Hassell, but we don't have proof of that. But there is chasing up before the last little Zoom meeting we had. I did find that there is a Ralph Hassall family, and it's possible that we can piece together. So once I run out of data, then you've got to look for other means of filling in the void. So then I started surveying all the families in a district, and that works until people hop districts. Now, in the 1600s, 1700s, people couldn't move very easily unless they were well off. But people did move, and so just surveying a local district of families doesn't necessarily mean you'll find your family. But I've tried a whole lot of different ways to fill in data. But we had lots of fun going around getting photos in England, and didn't meet any Hassell relatives. But as more data is being digitised, it's easy to find it. Having spent many days in dusty repositories, not turning up anything, that's really disappointing. Although a negative can be significant if you've done systematic research and you know that there's nothing there that relates to your family. But as in the last 20 years since we had the reunion in Coventry, there's an enormous amount of stuff's been digitised, and it's much easier to find things now. And a lot of other people have been doing their family history, and they're pulling in personal records that may not be in public repositories. And so if they can then give you a clue, or if a letter turns up and things, and there are things that still exist, then that can be very helpful. All right. I don't know if you want to talk more about the previous reunion, Graham, or I can go on and talk about the significance of genealogy and family history, which is an interesting question. Graham, I hadn't thought about that before, so actually checked on the definitions to make sure I got it right. But so genealogy is the study of descent, but genealogy in itself, I soon found, was rather boring. It's if you don't know who someone is and you just say this is the child of these parents, and they had these siblings, and they lived at such and such a place, and you don't know the place, and you don't know who they are, and you don't know what they did, it's not interesting at all. So family history then fleshes out the backbone, and but without doing your genealogy work first, you can't be sure that you've even got the right family. And some work has been done in the past, I'm sure, in many families where they got the wrong people. And I'm sure that's happened because not everyone's the child of who they think they are. That's where the genetics will come in one day. But that's a very broad brush way of doing things. Ancestry has the largest, you've probably all heard about how you can do your DNA genetically, and Ancestry has something like 700 million samples, some huge database, and that's actually being sought after by medical researchers now because they've got the best DNA database in the world as far as ethnicity is concerned. And that's some people have found that interesting in that they suddenly found connections that they didn't know about. And that person who you can't find much about, well, actually they weren't who they purported to be because they wanted to hide something. And so that's another way around when you hit a brick wall. And in every family, you'll hit a brick wall sooner or later, hopefully later. But so genealogy is essential, but I love family history. And one of my dreams, I guess, is to actually make a little vignette, a video because trying to get our children interested in family history is really difficult. And a lot of, well, 20 years ago, everyone sort of saw genealogy as, you know, something that you did in a dusty older archive, and it was boring as anything. And why would anyone be interested? It's not relevant to anyone but you. But the stories of people's stories are fascinating, and the more you find out, the more fascinating they are. And to make them come alive for the next generation, my vision was to actually get a little, set up a little storyboard and take photos of where they came from. And even if it's not in moving pictures, you can dress it up so that people can see what the place looked like where they lived. Even if the house isn't there, you might show the market square and things like that. Sometimes you don't know the actual house they lived in, but you'll know the parish. And so taking a photo of the parish and what's the land use there, and what's their history, more and more I've been finding, actually studying when you don't know what's happening, going back and researching the history of the place at the time that your ancestors was living there, that can actually give you clues. On one of my father's side, they suddenly left Midlands of England and came to Australia in 1848. And one of my cousins on my father's side, their child had to present a thing for school recently, and they wanted to know, why did the family come? And no one had actually said, but I read through a whole lot of records, and one of my great aunts, who's now passed away, had written in a letter to my grandmother that they came because of the Chartist riots. I was thinking, what's the Chartist riots? I've never heard of them. So I had to go and research that, and it matches perfectly with the story. And so it would seem that the Chartist riots were relevant to that family at that time. But since I'd never heard about it, I couldn't do anything. But it needed a family member to actually tip us off that that's where you've got to go and look. That's the value of family history, because then it gives meaning, and then you can understand why people travelled. I might leave it there for a minute. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Robert. That's a great start. I'm going to, I'm not sure what that sound is there, but I want to link the work that you did for the first reunion with the potential future meeting that we could have, for example, at the Thomas Hassell School, Anglican College, say in 2 years' time. Now, I recall that you worked pretty much on your own, and I remember you had to purchase each and every birth date and marriage certificate, and you had to acquire these documents and put it together. And much has changed since those early days. We've now got the internet, we can work together. And one of the questions that we face as an association is, how do we collaborate in bringing together the knowledge we have of the various family lines? Because the last thing we want is everybody doing the same research and making 10 different trees in 10 different software packages, etc. But what are your thoughts on how we could do our individual work, but share that in a way that we can benefit from each other's work? And how can that lead to a wonderful sharing of knowledge and stories when we eventually get together at the Thomas Hassell College?
Yeah, I think this is the power of a very large group like the Hassell family. The tree we printed off last time had 10,000 names on it, and now the huge number of those people have already passed away. But of course, it increases with every generation if you can only contact people. And I suggest a whole lot of people probably don't even know they have Hassell roots. But I think the first thing is to make a backbone on some website that the family can access, and then we add data, and as we add data we need to reference it, so it needs to be evidence-based, and then when there's if we all agree on the evidence, that's easy. And I would suggest that it would be a research project when if you have a primary source like a birth, marriage, or death certificate, then it would be, say, in black. If it's not, if you don't have a primary source but you've got a secondary source, the name could be printed in blue. But if you think that, well, this seems right, but I'm not sure, you could print it in red. So you could have a research project where it grows, and then as people see it, someone will see it, a red name, and say, oh yeah, but I've got a certificate of that, or I've got a letter that person wrote, and here's a copy of it, and it can be uploaded to the database and referenced, and then we can verify, and it won't take very long. There's so much information already on the Hassell tree, with all the stuff that is it John Brooks sent through last time?
Richard
Graham?
Clark. Remember, it's Richard Clark has.
Richard Clark, yeah.
Yes.
He's done a massive amount of work, and by looking through and putting the big databases we have already together, it will be obvious where, because everyone's really good on their own close relatives and their own close line, and I'm not much good when you go down to the Shelleys and people like that, but there are descendants of the Shelleys, and they will have a lot of information on that line, and they can then they will have more primary records, and so we build it up that way. So starting off with the backbone of what we do know, using a color coding system to say where we're doubtful, and then everyone just says, oh, but I've got this and someone's got that.
Thanks, Robert. So what we do know is that we have your work, which is a lot of documents, and we have Richard's file, which is not available yet on the internet, but it's available as a file. I have a copy now, but we haven't made a choice of platform of where we can put it so that we share it. There's a homework needs to be done. And I know also Angela Lind has done some work. Angela's online with us today. So I won't speak too much more now. I'll open it up to other questions that others may want to put to you. So would anybody like to put a question to Robert, or a comment about his work or about the future work that we can do together? Angela, have you got something to share? If you do, you might just unmute. Angela, if you unmute, we can hear you. You've got to unmute it. I'll see if I can do it.
Angela, can you hear us? You should unmute.
At the bottom left corner, there's a little mute sign, and you've got to take the red slash off it just by clicking on it.
Bottom left-hand side of your screen.
So just talk now and see if they can hear you.
Graham?
Yes, Ewan, go ahead.
I just had a question to Robert. Robert, what about the use of DNA? We're in, friend, I've got this, My Heritage, is it? And we keep getting these emails saying, you know, this third and fifth cousin is trying to contact you from the States and so on. I'm just wondering if that is going to play a part in this family history.
Yes, it will. It will more and more as we find out more. DNA, you probably realise, is incredibly complex. There's each human being has 3 billion base pairs in their DNA, and so it's far too many to count. But they've worked out certain alleles, certain parts of the DNA strand are variable, and they are some are characteristic of certain parts of the world. And by by having a massive database, they've been able to say, well, this sequence of DNA, which we call an allele, is more common if you come from Barcelona or something.
I see.
Or, you know, there's certain things like thalassemia. We discovered in later life that my mum carries the gene for beta thalassemia. And so we think that's not a Hassell trait, but rather on mum's mother's side. And I think it's come from the Huguenots who came over from France in about the 1780s, the Gouldens who went to Kent. A trait that has seems to come down through the Hassells is what I call atopy. Atopy is the tendency to be allergic to things, so to get asthma, eczema, hay fever, and allergies. And we know that Samuel O'Toole died when he was relatively young, and I suspect that he had asthma. And I think he got that from his father. Looking at the family history, that's another one of my interests I haven't told you about, but I'm fascinated by people's medical conditions and how that runs through families. One family on mum's side, the Philcoxes, in one family from South Australia, 6 out of 12 children died before they got the age of 5, which is a very unusual pattern in Australia. And I am sure there was some genetic problem there. I don't know what it was, but it could be something like cystic fibrosis. Yes, you can, for $99, you can get Ancestrycom to, you send a swab away and they will check your DNA sequencing, and they will give you a history of where they think your DNA came from. And now we all only get half the DNA of our parents. So it would be interesting to see, to go back to as far as you can, so because that will give you more history of the DNA of that family line.
Rob, can I mention that you mentioned Samuel O'Toole dying young, and I know a Hassell fellow who's got a book that was given, that Dr. James Milam gave to his son-in-law, Samuel, to help. It's a book on health. So he was concerned with the health of Samuel. It might be an indication that he did have a health problem. But I forgot the guy's name now, but I've got a record of it. I've got a picture of a couple of pictures of the actual book.
Oh, okay.
Really, yes. A book on health, dated 1790 or something like that.
Right, that'd be James Milam.
Yeah.
To just
Go to Hassell.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting. That's a very interesting book to have. It would be good to take a scan of that and the title page and things as well.
I'll dig out what I've got and send it to you, including the fellow's name. I wanted to buy from him, but he wouldn't part with the world.
Right.
That's great. Thanks. I think we've just found a little newsletter item there for you to work on. No, really, he hadn't told me that, so that's great. Now,
I haven't heard that before either. So,
Robert, you just said that for $99, you can send a swab to Ancestry?
Ancestry.com.
This is an important question my son asked. He wants to get his DNA done, but I said, well, there are so many companies doing it. I don't know which one, because you can spend $500. You've just said $99, so my ears pricked up.
Yes, Ancestry.com is run by the Mormon Church in the USA. It's got the advantage that they've got the largest database in the world. So I'm sure that if there's money to be made, someone will find a way of fleecing you of more of it if they can. But Ancestry they've got too much to lose by not being upfront, because it's you know that as you realize, it's part of the Mormon religion to research your ancestors, and the more that people research their own and share, the faster the knowledge base grows. So no, I think I haven't done it myself. It would be interesting to do one day. I've been too busy, but yes, if anyone wants to, I think that you'll get some interesting results.
So Hewan, thank you, Hewan, for that question, because that led us to discuss that. And I was thinking we should ask Rob about the significance of DNA. So thank you, Hewan, for that question. At some stage, I might share the screen and show you Richard Clark's genealogy, if you're interested, just to show you a little bit of the format of it. But I'll also wait to see what other questions and comments you have for Robert. Jane, you got something there? You have to unmute. Jane, you have to unmute. Sorry, I muted you earlier.
Right, is that better?
Oh, Angela, we've got you now.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Angela, and then Jane.
Right. I want to say this is marvellous having Rob speaking to us, because I met him through his grandfather years and years ago, and then in London just before he was married, and knew he had some, been doing some marvellous work on the family. So I've come down with that, and then Hugh and I met by socializing in Wagga years ago. I think I have told him that. But yes, and your uncle, and well, mother too, of course, Rob, but Rich, anyway, no, I have I've been working on the genealogy all that time as well, and I'm happy to share it. I haven't made it public, originally, but as I say, I did enjoy too the bicentenary gathering they had at Camden, basically. But anyway, yes, as I say, I am vaguely working on it. My genealogy charts, or the program has died somewhat, or my computer has with it. But anyway, marvelous to be, part of this, and look forward to maybe keeping things up with you. So that'd be good. Thank you. Thank
Angela, thanks for that. We look forward to finding some way that you can share, because you've been working for so many years on these genealogical information. And it's just the reason we're holding these types of sessions is to find a way that we can share and benefit and make sure that no effort has been lost or put aside. And that's why we're having these sessions. So thanks for coming online and sharing that. We just got to find out how we can and see your marvelous work in the future.
I know you did send me something, but unfortunately it was too large for my computer to cope with a few years ago. So yes, I mean, I go to the meetings usually too. I have been for the last few years. So, it's wonderful I feel very honoured being part of the family, distant part anyway, but thank you.
Can I suggest, Angela's done a massive amount of work on families that are tied into the Hassells, like the Kennedys, Humes and people. If there is research and you don't know who to pass it on to, organisations like the Society of Genealogists will store stuff, and especially since we can digitise stuff now, to digitise it and to send it to a group, a genealogical group, means that your work isn't lost, and especially photos. It's so sad. I've got albums and albums of photos I know they're of the family, and we can't identify a good number of people. I've kept them because I'm hoping with facial recognition and stuff in future that we'll have programs that will be able to say, well, this is that person when they grew older or when they were younger and things like that. So I don't throw things out, but it's really sad when it hasn't been recorded adequately, and someone knew, but they didn't write it down.
Very often photo albums invariably don't have a name. Photographs. I belong to the genealogists, and I'm a virtual life member or something these days. I've been there so long, but this sort of thing, if I can't meet up with family, will my research will go there. Here's a familiar face, just come on board.
Oh, thanks, Jane. So maybe Jane, you've got something to share now.
Yes, Robert. It's interesting you saying your family, your grandmothers, I think you said, were great collectors. Both my mother and father and my Aunt Meg and my grandmother stored a huge amount of memorabilia. I've got Bibles, letters, diaries. I'm the one I'm the eldest of that line of my family, and I've got it here in the house, but I'm really, really worried about sensitive documents. And when I say sensitive, the fragility of paper. And although my father on his dying bed said, never let anything go out of the family, don't send it to a library, he thought it was more important to keep it within the family. But I think that all I need is a mouse plague or something to happen. And also I'm a great believer in, as you say, passing things on to the next generation, contributing to research. So my question to you is, where do you think what should I do with these old Bibles, papers, diaries? Does it go to the Mitchell Library, Canberra? What are your thoughts, Robert, on these memorabilia, items, artifacts, things like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a very difficult one. I think the first thing is to document it. You want to, if at all possible, digitize everything so that there's a photograph or an identified one, and or a scan if it's a document, a letter or something, and referencing is so important. A lot of, and I think the best thing is to scatter the information far and wide. So my plan, I haven't put it into action yet, when I retire one day, which I'm not going to do, but when I stop working full-time in medicine, I plan to do this, to actually systematically digitize everything. And then, because a lot of things have other places, like I've got them from the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland, or in Kew in London. And so there's documents from all around the world. And so it's important to document where you got it from, but then to say that on this date you were holding it. And if you know it's an original letter or something, it's really interesting to know the history of that letter. How did, at what stage I had letters, and it was through Nan, I think. I had a letter that was written about Napoleon being at the gates of, it was the Toomer family. It was the Toomer family, and Napoleon was at the gates of Vienna. And it was a handwritten letter. I don't know where it is. Uncle David might remember. But that sort of thing. How did we get that letter? And all that sort of stuff. It's the thing is, it's tedious. Archiving is quite specialist work to do it well. And then if you've got stuff that's fragile, a lot of the paper has acid in it, especially modern paper, and it deteriorates. That's why digitizing stuff, so you've got electronic version of it, but then if you've got especially old photographs, after you've digitized those, to actually put them in acid-free tissue paper or something like that, an acid-free album, so that the paper, so that the medium that you use to store it doesn't deteriorate the original. Because if something's 150 years old, it possibly won't have acid in the paper. So that medium that it's printed on will actually last longer than what you're going to put it in to maintain it. And and a lot of the stuff we had, you know, that shiny paper from the 70s and 80s and 90s, that fades with time. And so if you've got stuff like that, you want to digitize that quickly. And Graham was talking about an optical character recognition program on his printer, and I'm going to take him up on that suggestion when I get time. So to get a photocopier that does optical character recognition automatically and put it into your computer, and that way we have the original. But then we can, if it's fragile and it's deteriorating, you can take a scan of it, but then you can also store it on disk. And then my idea is to then send, and I've done this with photos, is if I've got relatives back who came to Australia, then went back to England. And so the idea is to then send copies, and my relatives in England on my father's side have sent me photos as well. And so we then spread it out. So if one set of information is lost, then someone else has got another copy of it. And in fact, I got that because Richard, through Graham, I got a copy of the tree because my computer crashed when Windows 10 came in and destroyed my computer, and I hadn't got the backup wasn't good enough, and I lost the big tree that we had 20 years ago. I've got all the original sources that I used to build the tree, but that's a lot of work doing it again. And I tend to be meticulous, making sure that the data that goes on the tree is triple checked so that I know that I can trust it. And so you've got to go through all that trust process again to make sure that the veracity of the information you're entering. But on the just recording that you're talking about is first record it and then digitize it and then spread it to anybody and everybody that you think might be interested. The Mitchell Library is a great repository. The Society, if it's especially for the Hassell family, because of the Hassell family papers, they're always interested in extending the collection because it's a living collection, if you like.
Yep. I mean, are there courses in archival? I mean, I want to do it properly. I don't know. I'm about to retire in the next few months, so I'm very interested in all this family history, but I feel I lack skills on the computer how to do it properly.
Graham's
I
the
just
professional.
need some help. Graham.
It's
You know, I could waste time doing it in a way.
I think it's what works. So I haven't got formal training in either history or archiving, but it's what I've learned. By mistake. I've made mistakes, and then I guess I've spoken to people. Go and talk to the local librarian, or go to the Society of Genealogists and talk to the archivists there, or go to the Mitchell Library and say, look, I've got this stuff. Would you be interested in a copy of it? I'm thinking of copying it, and say, and what format would you like it in? And so ask their opinion. Everyone's got a different format, unfortunately. The thing to be aware of when you digitize things is that one form of technology gets superseded very fast, and technology's accelerating, so it's changing faster and faster. I've got a lot of videos that I took when I was in England in the 80s, and I've saved all my old equipment, because I haven't had time to transcribe them. I rescued my father-in-law's cines from the 1960s, 50s and 60s, but I had to use my my father-in-law's machine, which now my brother-in-law has in England, and I had to do a transcription process, which I've now put it onto videotape. And then recently I had to then transfer the videotape onto digital discs. And so now I've burnt them to DVDs, but just be careful when you scan stuff or take photos that the files, we're standardizing stuff now, which we didn't have before, but they wrote to give you an example, in the Netherlands, they brought in a digital healthcare system in the 70s or something, and they have a massive amount of data, but they don't have the machines anymore to run it, and they can't transcribe it. I'm sure they could if they spent enough money, but they've decided it's not worth it, and they're going to lose all that data because no one had an upgrade path for that format. So this is the problem with information, is it's layer upon layer, and it's not good enough just to have the information. You've got to have the medium and then the mechanisms that you store the information within and retrieve it from the medium. So this is a really important thing in archiving.
Okay.
The hard way.
Right.
And it's
Thank
good
you.
thing
That's
is,
I want to remark about about old photos, particularly photos that are 100 years old. I always recommend to people, if the libraries want them, for example, the Mitchell Library, it's the State Library of New South Wales. If they want the picture, give it to them. Make yourself the best possible copy. But people have found in the past that if you keep it within the family, the time will come when there'll be nobody in the family will be interested in, and these precious old pictures just disappear, get molded, get thrown into corners and that sort of thing. And the Stuart Hume told us he went to one house where there was a lot of very interesting historical letters and pictures and all sorts of things. They'd be thrown into a cardboard box and put in the laundry in some place where they were getting damp and ruined. And he just about cried because there was so much information, so much family stuff just destroyed because nobody was interested. If the Mitchell Library's got it, well, they've got the original, so that's something to think about.
okay.
yeah,
Thank
that's very good advice, because silverfish eat stuff, and you've got to have sealed boxes and all sorts of things, and it's got to be dry. The advantage I've got down in Cooma is it's cold and dry, and so the records are relatively safer. But a lot of the stuff was under Mum's house, and I bought some expensive books before I went to England. And under Mum's house, everything got slightly damp. Luckily, the photos I'd kept upstairs in the house, but the books still smell of mould. Now, you can buy more of the books, but you can't get the original photos, as Uncle David says.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for those questions. We'll go just a little longer and give a chance for others who are online who haven't made a comment or asked a question. I can see online Christine and Charlie there, Barbara's there, James, Melissa's there, Alison, Kevin and Ro. So just a chance for you to either just say hi or what your interest is, or whether you've got material that you're concerned about, and who would like to share something with us.
Graham?
Yes, Alison, and then Charlie.
Yeah, Graham. Rob, thank you very much for what this morning. But I've come on because last session, I think you left a lot of people very enthused with what you were saying, at whether it was all the way through or at the end, or just one wild statement that you might have made about the Hassell family. What is there anything from your last session to this session that is so different? I don't know what your last session was about at all, but have you covered the same material that you covered in the last session, or is there some little snippet that you'd like to give me that I missed out on last time?
Oh, I don't know, David. Graham, what haven't I said?
One of the interesting things you said was that of all the family lines, because we're all in multiple family lines, but you said the Hassell family was the best documented of the families that you are descended from. And that was
Yes.
intriguing to us. I know you talked about the genetics quite a bit, and that was interesting as well. You talked about the blonde hair or the blue eyes or something. You talked about something that was the genetic thing that most of us don't know. That was something that you didn't mention today.
Yeah, so all right, it's interesting when you study large groups of people, and I didn't realize it before, but I've helped organize a few different reunions, and each reunion has its own feeling. And I never realized this before, but there is and this is a gross generalization, so everyone will know an exception, but my feeling when we had the reunion, there were about 500 people came to Coventry and Camden. There was this sort of peaceful feeling between all the people, and I've been to other reunions which are very different, but I think about it as there's a characteristic of certain families, and one of the characteristics of the Hassell family is that the first word that comes to mind is benign, which isn't very useful, but there's a peace or the family in general wants to get together, wants to work together, wants to be together, and I could probably describe it as you might have heard of A-type personalities and B-type personalities, and I'm an A-type personality like my father. You see a goal and you work towards it, and you don't stop till you achieve it, and then you make it better. Most people in medicine are the same. The B-type personality was my Hassell grandfather, who would see a drought and see his crop not come up, and he said, "Yeah, but it'll rain again." And the B-type personality is just satisfied with themselves. They're not trying to compete with everyone else all the time. They work amicably with everyone, looking for the best in people. I remember my grandfather wrote his story, and then forever he was editing out things because he thought something might offend somebody. And I was thinking, you're taking out all the interesting little tidbits and stuff, but that was his nature, is he never wanted to offend anybody. He wanted to get on with everybody. And that seems to be a trait that is part of the Hassell family. Now, you can't write that down. You can't put that into words. You can't even, I don't even know a way of measuring it. It's a feeling that you get, but it's something over the family as a whole. It's a B-type personality family. Now there's been High Court judges and all sorts of other people in the family, and I'm sure to get to the High Court of Australia, you have to have a bit of get up and go, or you're not going to make it. And but in general, that's the feeling I get with the Hassell family, and because they're very collegiate, collegial, they want to work together, and as such, and I think that's one of the reasons why. I mean, this is the only family history group that is ongoing that in my 27 different family lines, I follow, and I think that's partly because of the history. But they in twin studies they've done in the US, they think that we are 70% our characteristics are 70% inherited and 30% environmentally acquired. And so that means 2/3 of us comes down the family line through our genetics. And that would suggest that families are more alike. that's a truism that everyone accepts. That sort of comes down through the ages as you're more like your, the saying blood is thicker than water is a product of that. And so there seems to be something, and we don't know where personality and things come from, but there seems to be a genetic component to some extent. And that's just something that is different about the Hassell family that isn't the cut and thrust of some of the other families you will see around. Certainly my father's side of the family is quite different. And so I guess I can contrast that. That's the first thing on genetics. I had red hair, and that was something that interested me in genetics, went to blue eyes, because red hair is only 2% of the population or something in Australia. But so trying to work out where it came from. But the reports of, we don't have photographs of Hamilton Hume, but Hamilton Hume was renowned to have bright red hair. And so that intrigued me. He's described as having blue eyes and red hair, and coming from a Scottish, because the largest group of people with red hair comes from Scotland, with other nodes in the Netherlands, and a little group down the Danube in Russia. But that was part of why I started the genetics. What was the other thing you mentioned, Graham? I've forgotten.
I have too. I was enjoying that. Well, I think you've covered it, but it was about the fact that the family was well documented.
Oh yes, that's intriguing as to how that happened, and I'm not even sure I know why so many Hassell family documents have made their way to the Mitchell Library. But again, it might just be the fact that the Hassell family is connected, and they've conserved things. Now, being on the land, they've probably had if you stay in one place for several generations, then the documents tend to stay in the house. So looking at my grandmother's family in Cootamundra, you could go to Littledale and the family had been there since 1875. And so the documents were still in the house, and that was quite good. When I went to Northern Ireland, looking at some of my wife's families, people have been in the house for 3 or 4 generations, and there's a trunk, and they throw all the documents in there. And one place I could have spent a month in there. They hadn't looked at it, and I had 2 hours to go through a huge trunk of family history. It was a shame. I've only been there once, and I've never been able to go back. But sometimes you'll find a treasure trove like this, and you need to somehow get it recorded. But the Hassell family has seen that there's benefit in keeping the records. It's interesting that Hamilton Hume's family settled at Toongabbie Creek when they came in 1804. There was big floods, and they lost all their family documentation, which was important when they were looking at trying to inherit an ancestral seat in Scotland. But obviously people prized their documents, and the de Kerallo family from France, they lost their documents at sea when one of the sons was lost. So documents used to be more important than they are now. Somehow the Hassells have put them together, and so I would encourage you, if people write memoirs within the family line, offer them to the Mitchell Library, because and point out that they should be added to the Hassell collection. And I'm sure the Mitchell will be only too delighted to extend their collection, because I don't know whether it's the biggest collection, but it's one of the biggest collections in Australian history.
Thanks, Rob. I will just add something to that it's not straightforward to donate to the Mitchell Library, even to extend that collection. There's a process that you have to go through. And I think it would be better if we coordinate that through the association, rather than going with a few documents at a time. I have had a meeting with, it was 2 or 3 years ago, Hewan was with me, and there's quite a process in assuring them of the necessity for storing particular documents. They're not in a hurry to add a lot of documents, because it also takes up their space. So, but I think if we have a consolidated set of materials to give them, it would be more worth their while than a few here and a few there. So that's something we can talk about. I think also that what some of the discussion today will aid us in thinking through our next research meeting that we could hold at the State Library. It's been in abeyance for about 2 years, but surely we are getting back to a stage, although it may not have been in Sydney, may invite you to the Gold Coast. Come to the Gold Coast and we'll host everybody here. But we do need to have a research meeting so we can talk about such things as how to preserve materials that are in the family care, and how to scan and document and catalogue. There are many practical sessions that we could have together rather than just the show and tell that we've been having so far. So this meeting today has helped us think through how we could articulate that research meeting. So thank you for that. So before we finish today, I've offered that invitation. Anybody else online who wants to add something or ask Robert a question?
Yes, I would.
Let Melissa go ahead. And then I think Charlie, I get a sense you might have had something. So Melissa, then Charlie.
I just wanted to perhaps add a comment to what you said about the feeling that you had at the last reunion. I'd say that from my research and gathering that the Hassell family were quiet achievers, and they weren't there to big note themselves or to basically act to try to forward themselves, but act for the community and for the wider good of the community, and look to the better good of the community based on their Christian values and the common good. And it was a more of an egalitarian society, group and family, and for the wider good of the colonies, the society that they were living in.
Actually, that's a great comment. We actually use that the quiet achievers as one saying we at the time, and I'd forgotten that. Yes, I'm sure it's their Wesleyan background that they were there to educate and help those around them, that made them go out across Australia and talk to people, and so that's a very good observation. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Melissa. Charlie, just unmute and unmute.
Hi, how are you? We're very privileged to be part of this group.
We're here on behalf of Chris, who's part of the John Oxley line. And we're also privileged to have Chris's mum living with us in this situation in Sydney. She's just about to turn 91. And we've been sitting down with her in recent times, compiling a bit about her family history as much as she can recall, but certainly she has some good memories going back many, many years, and we're putting that together to try and get a better understanding of where she came from, and as much as she knows, and can tell us a little bit about different people and certainly relatives she's had with the family. Her partner has passed away a fair while ago now, so we're privileged to be left with her at the moment, and hopefully she can contribute something and tell us a lot about what's going on in her 91 years of living. Graham was also going to mention that we've just received the kits from Ancestry.com, which we're about to do. They only took a couple of days to arrive. I was quite surprised at the speed at which they did arrive. So, and we don't see any problems putting that through. So we're going to get Chris's mother to also contribute to that. And Chris has a sister as well. So they'll both be contributing to that as well. Jane, I was also going to make a mention to you. Don't worry about retirement. I've been retired for a couple of years now, and there is always plenty to do.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm finding that.
Yes, there's definitely plenty to do to keep you going. So that's where we come from. We're looking forward to the next meeting. We did attend a meeting, I think it was one a couple of years ago that we had at the State Library, And that was very, very interesting. Unfortunately, due to circumstances over the last 18 months, it's very difficult for everyone to get together. But areas of like this, to have good conversation between people is really wonderful to see. So thank you all. It's very good.
Well, thanks so much, Charlie and Chris, and all the best with those interviews of your mum. And we look forward to seeing you at one of the future meetings. So thanks so much for that.
I think Chris might have a question.
I have a question. We're trying to find the people that are buried at St. Paul's Anglican Church at Coventry. We've been out there, but we just need a contact to be able to find everybody who's supposed to be out there on the Oxley side and the Hassell side. Do you know of anybody who we could contact?
We did look at this 20 years ago because we went to the Heber Chapel and to St. Paul's, and we were interested in identifying individual graves. Some people have started putting secondary bronze plaques on the stone because the stone wears or weathers, and so people have been adding extra bits. I know there's an index. I would Google it to begin with. Just go to Professor Google and put St. Paul's Churchyard or Heber Chapel, Coventry, and then map of the graveyard or something like that. And even if it isn't online, and you might find it's actually online, but even if it isn't, it might point you to some where the repository is, because there used to be a map that showed you which was which, but it's too long ago for me to remember.
Yeah.
I should also mention that we have a Facebook group. So in Facebook, you just search for Hassall Family History Association, and a number of our members on that group who aren't online with us today have been putting their research on family gravestones with photos. There just might be somebody there who has that knowledge, so try that as well.
Thank you.
Now,
that's actually another point, is when you do identify a family gravestone, it's really good if you take a photograph of it, because it can deteriorate over time. And in our local little churchyard, which is 150 yards up from us, it's the oldest one on the Monero, someone went in with sledgehammers one day and decided they just break up the stones and turn them over and smash them for no good reason. And so if you find a gravestone, take a photograph of it and then draw a map and identify where you found it within the cemetery, and if possible with photographs, so sort of show landmarks and things so that it can be identified again. Because I found that I'll find things and it'll be decades before I get back again, and I've forgotten all the details, having been to many different places. And but if you've got a record of it, it's really valuable, and then you can pass it on to others who are looking as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good tip.
well, just one last chance for anybody to have a final question or comment or announcement.
Yeah, Rob, can I ask you, at the last session, which I attended, did you mention something about a passion of yours would be to make a movie? I know you just mentioned a storyboard, but did I remember correctly? You were especially about to bring the Hassell story to life for the next generation, and particularly that Roland Hassell, how he came to be, you know, how he died and then he came to life again, and that led his family course. Did you mention something about a movie?
Oh yes, yes, I'd forgotten about that. The I see that's the ultimate in telling history, is to make it come alive. I had history teachers at school who made it deadly boring, and I had some history teachers who made it fascinating. And it is all in the art of the teacher and the presentation. And so I was thinking, well, why can't we make it so that it's so that it's entertaining and interesting, because you know there's really interesting. I think of the story of William Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery, and there's this slave that was involved with the movement, and he's actually buried in Teeston in Kent, where the Kennedys came from, and beside the church there. And his story is fascinating, from the West Indies to England to becoming free, and how he was involved with Wilberforce in the abolition of slavery movement. And we could make a fabulous movie out of the Hassell story, and how it's helped build Australia. But it's a huge project, and I don't have the skills to do that, nor the time, but I've got the imagination.
Thank you.
Any movie makers out there?
Think about it.
Well, I was just going to say, when we had the bicentenary 1988, and David and Hugh, and I'm sure you had a huge hand in this, the pageant at the first Friday evening that started off the whole weekend. As you say, Robert, the movie would tell a story. That whole pageant evening is just etched in my brain so strongly. What a great story. And I'll never forget coming together and joining in that, eating that cake of the people there, of the wedding that was taking place, and singing that hymn, everyone singing that hymn together. What a story. What a thrill. Never forget it.
Rob had a lot to do with that.
That was you, David, was?
Rob was one of the prime movers of that festival.
Yeah, that was a passion I had to make that happen, because I wanted people to see the history and live the history rather than just read the history. And so a script writer from Queensland helped write the script, and so I fleshed out the story, because the triple wedding, it's based, for those who don't know, it's based around the triple wedding in November 1819 at St John's in Parramatta, where 3 Hassell children were married at the one ceremony. And so it reenacts. Yes, it's more. I mean, there's as much fact in there as we could find, but we made up other bits. But we had a procession where the Roland and Elizabeth entered, and we darkened the Camden Town Hall, and everyone had we had a procession of the family, in inverted commas, from the early 1800s, led by Roland and Elizabeth and their children and their spouses, and we found actors from within the family who could live out or act out as they roughly would have been at the 1819 wedding. And then each person came up on stage and told their story of how they'd come to be there that day. And yeah, it turned out quite well. I was just really saying the video of it was woeful and isn't worth watching. But so that was what we'd already planned to reenact the pageant and do a better job at videoing it this time. And Catherine, who wrote the final script last time, was willing to volunteer the script, and she sent it to me because I lost it. And so we can do that again, because and I think with the facilities at the Thomas Hassell School, I'm sure they've probably got a hall where we can do that. But yeah, I'd forgotten about the pageant, but that's the sort of thing that I think that's how you present family history in a way that is really consumable, I guess, by the next generation. People feel it instead of just learning it.
Because it's not just of interest for the Hassell family, it's of interest for Australians, you know, to know more of our history and our the English foundations, I suppose, that came here. And yeah, I just think it's a very good idea.
So now you can all do it for all your different family lines as well. Don't think small, got to think big.
That's right. That's what Ross Whelan said, to think big.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for today. I think we've come to the end of the session, the end of the questions. I can't see anybody else who's putting their hand up, although I have cajoled a number of people several times. So it's been a splendid session today. We've gotten to know your background a little more, your contribution in this area. And in talking that over, we have got some ideas for the future. And it's been a very rewarding session for everybody involved. We thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody for coming online. And if there is interest, we will hold some more of these sessions in the future. We look forward to being in touch with everyone. Any contributions to the newsletter are welcome. And let's hope we get together again soon. So goodbye for now.
Bye.
Thanks, Graham.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.